Chosen one, there was a time when your words scattered into the air like loose sparks, fiery, passionate, attention-catching, but without direction. You spoke to be heard. You spoke to be understood. You spoke to fill the space, to prove that your presence carried weight. But all of that is behind you now. The man you are becoming has surrendered the need for validation, and in its place, a new kind of speech has emerged, a voice shaped by presence, carved by fire, and delivered with intention. You no longer speak to be seen. You speak because you are rooted, and the world feels that now. You're not just talking anymore. You're transmitting. Your voice has become an instrument of calm power, and women are not just hearing your words, they are feeling them. Your tone has shifted. It no longer dances in the shallow rhythms of flattery or performance. It flows slowly, deliberately, with an authority that doesn't ask for agreement, it simply exists. Because when a man no longer performs for connection, his words become the echo of his inner alignment. Your high sexual energy now rests beneath your voice like a hidden engine, quiet, constant, alive. It doesn't need to dominate the conversation. It doesn't leak through aggressive charm or fast-talking confidence. It waits, it simmers, it wraps your words in warmth, in fire that no longer burns recklessly. That kind of fire is felt, not seen. And when you speak, especially to women, that warmth slips beneath the surface. It lands not in the ears but in the heart, not in her logic but in her instinct. You are no longer the loudest man in the room. But when you speak, something stills, something shifts. Your voice carries a sacred rhythm now, a pause, a space, an awareness that shows you are not just present in your speech, but anchored in it. And that anchoring makes your words feel safe to listen to. That's why she's leaning in now. Not because you're louder than the rest, but because you're clearer. She feels the difference when you speak. Not because you flatter her, not because you know what to say, but because you don't need to say anything to be felt. And when you do open your mouth, your energy doesn't change, it amplifies. It holds the room the same way your body does. It doesn't reach, it doesn't rush, it simply delivers truth, wrapped in restraint, laced with presence, marked by purpose. This is why she listens, why her breath slows, why her posture softens, why she begins to forget the scripts she's rehearsed for lesser men. Because your voice doesn't ask her to perform, it invites her to return to herself. And there is no performance greater than that. You are not wooing her with a voice, you are grounding her with a frequency. Your mouth is no longer just a tool for attraction, it is a channel for what is real. Your words are not empty, they are not reactive, they are chosen. And because they are chosen, they feel like something holy. You don't speak often, and when you do, it's not to dominate the space, it's to settle it. And in that settling, chosen one, you are becoming a voice she doesn't just hear, you are becoming a voice she feels safe to remember. Chosen one, every word that leaves your lips now carries a story that isn't being told, but it's being felt. You don't need to explain your journey, your energy already speaks it. Your voice isn't just a mouthpiece for ideas, it's the evidence of a fire that once raged through you and was not wasted. You've passed through it. You've survived your own storms, and because of that, your voice doesn't just sound different, it lives differently. You no longer speak with uncontained hunger. You no longer chase agreement. You no longer talk for the sake of being heard. Your words are not thrown, they are placed. And when they land deep. Not because they are loud, but because they are true. You've burned through the need to convince anyone. You've let your sexual energy be purified, pulled inward, forged into focus, and now it fuels your voice like a steady flame in your chest. It doesn't rush, it radiates. Women feel this when you speak, not in the obvious way, not in the dramatic way. They feel it in the way your voice doesn't try to perform, but it still holds weight. They feel it in how you say simple things, yet they echo with gravity. You don't lean into seduction, you lean into clarity. And clarity is what the feminine longs to feel when she listens. Not cleverness, not manipulation, grounded, warm, intentional clarity. When you speak to her now, you're not coaxing her openness, you're mirroring it. Your voice has stopped asking her to give. Instead, it offers safety by speaking with sacred control. And that control, chosen one, is what transforms your mouth into a space of permission. It's not what you say, it's what your fire does not do that earns her trust. She hears what you've mastered. She doesn't know the full story, but her body picks up the signal. She senses that your voice used to be loud, but now it's deep. She senses that your mouth used to chase, but now it contains. She senses that your words were once driven by passion, but now they are held by principle. And that shift, felt in tone, in silence, in rhythm, is what causes her to stop preparing to defend herself when you speak, because your voice doesn't come to take, it comes to bless. It doesn't come to win, it comes to witness. It doesn't come to perform, it comes to anchor. That's why she's loving your mouthpiece now. Not because you say what she wants to hear, but because you say what can only be spoken by a man who has mastered his own flame. A man who has learned when to speak and when to let silence speak for him. A man who no longer uses words to pull women closer, but to let them feel the depth of what already exists inside him. Your words have weight because your fire now serves your voice, not the other way around. And when a woman hears that, truly hears it, she doesn't just listen. She remembers something about herself that only a rare kind of man can awaken, and she wants to hear you again. Chosen one, the world has heard enough noise. Empty words, rehearsed lines, voices that echo desire without discipline. But your voice has stepped into a different realm now. It is no longer simply attractive. It has become authority. Not the kind that forces or flaunts, but the kind that settles a room the moment it enters. When you speak now, you no longer seek agreement. You don't perform. You don't aim to impress. You establish. And that establishment is what sets you apart from every other voice in the crowd. Women are no longer drawn to you merely because of the sound of your voice. They're drawn to what your voice announces without words, that you are no longer seeking validation in the way you speak. You've refined your mouth. You've purified your tone. You've removed flattery, manipulation, and strategy. Your words no longer beg for admiration. They simply exist in alignment with who you are. That alignment speaks louder than volume, and that volume cannot be faked. You have become a man who commands attention not by demanding it, but by the way your words vibrate with integrity. When you speak to a woman now, she doesn't just hear your voice. She hears stability. She hears inner work. She hears a flame that has been tamed and given a throne. There is a quality in your speech that makes her stop mid-thought, not because you shocked her, but because you centered her. And the masculine energy that can center a woman's spirit is the energy that creates reverence. Your voice used to be laced with want. Now it is filled with conviction. You speak slowly, not because you are unsure, but because you have nothing to rush. You let pauses breathe. You don't fill silences. You allow meaning to hang in the air. Because your mouth no longer exists to entertain. It exists to reveal, and that revelation shows up in the way women respond. Not with excitement, but with openness, with presence, with stillness, with an instinctual desire to listen longer, even if they don't understand why. The truth is, she doesn't want you to talk forever. She wants your words to continue to be what they've become, evidence that the man in front of her has nothing to hide. You're not trying to convince her to trust you. You're not trying to win her with clever lines. You're simply speaking from a mouth that has already been baptized in fire and silence. And that kind of voice builds trust before the first sentence ends. When you speak now, you speak as if your words carry weight, because they do. Your high sexual energy no longer makes your words slick. It makes them steady. It doesn't make your voice louder. It makes it truer. She doesn't fall for what you say. She feels what you've survived to say it. And that feeling cannot be faked. It cannot be mimicked. It can only come from a man whose voice no longer reflects his ego. It reflects his becoming. You have become a mouthpiece of authority because you surrendered your need to be heard. You now speak because you've earned the right to. You speak because what you say is not just your opinion. It is the expression of a spirit that no longer bends for applause. And that's what she's loving. Not your pitch, not your rhythm, but the integrity behind the sound. That kind of voice doesn't chase admiration, it births connection. And connection is what causes her heart to make room. Chosen one, in a world where most men speak to impress, to seduce, to seize attention and harvest validation, you have become different. You speak now without an agenda, without pulling, pushing, or reaching. And yet when you do speak, something rare happens. They give. Not because you demanded, not because you convinced, but because your words no longer come to take. You speak as a man who has enough, who is enough, and when you speak from fullness, the feminine opens. Not because she's been persuaded, but because her spirit recognizes that she's no longer being hunted, she's being seen. That's why they give, chosen one, not just attention, but truth. They give trust, vulnerability. They lean forward, not out of curiosity, but because your voice now invites them into a space where they feel undisturbed. And that is everything. When you open your mouth, you are not luring, you are revealing space. And women, who are so often spoken to from angles of expectation and layers of pretense, recognize something ancient in your speech. The presence of a man whose words ask for nothing in return, yet somehow create an internal yielding. That yielding is sacred. It means her armor comes down not because it was pierced, but because it was no longer necessary. This only happens because your mouth has been reborn. Not by lessons or technique, but through the inner discipline of letting your fire be purified. You no longer speak to gain, you speak to offer witness. And in that witnessing, women begin to open doors within themselves they had forgotten were even there. When your voice carries that kind of depth, the depth that holds, honors, and never rushes, you don't have to ask for access. The door swings open because the house finally feels safe. You are no longer a visitor trying to be invited in. You have become the kind of man the house was waiting for. And your mouth? It's not the key. It's the confirmation that what's inside you matches what she felt long before she heard your first word. There is no seduction in your tone. There is sovereignty. You speak with command, not control. You speak with reverence, not resistance. And that reverence creates safety without submission. The kind of safety that makes her want to give, not because she feels obligated, but because she feels met. So she gives. Her openness, her softness, her laughter, her depth. Not because you chased it, not because you earned it, but because your voice became the one place where her truth could breathe. That is what they're loving about your mouth now. It's not the words. It's what your energy doesn't take, yet somehow receives. And in a world full of noise, that makes your voice feel like a prayer answered in secret. Chosen one, the voice they now lean into, the mouth they find themselves drawn to, the sound they crave to hear again. It did not emerge from performance or natural charm. It was built in the furnace of your silence. Before your words held this weight, there were seasons where you had no words at all. Times when you were quiet, not out of mystery, but out of brokenness. When the world didn't ask what you had to say, and even if it did, you didn't trust your voice to carry what you truly felt. You sat in that silence, not knowing it was sculpting your future sound. You thought the quiet was emptiness, but it was excavation. The world took from you the stage, and heaven gave you the cave. And in that cave, you met the truth of who you were beneath the noise. You listened before you spoke. You watched before you reached. You breathed before you built. And over time, your voice was formed, not for volume, but for value. Not for reaction, but for reverence. This is why when you speak now, chosen one, women stop moving. Because they're not responding to words. They're responding to stillness, remembered. They're hearing restraint behind the sound. Your high sexual energy, once raw and scattered, now wraps itself around your speech like a sheath. It doesn't scream, it hums. It doesn't flirt, it focuses. And that focused restraint is felt as security in the hearts of the feminine. Your silence was not absence, it was sacred soil. It grounded your ego, it grew your roots, and now every time you speak, it carries the memory of that silence. A memory that tells the feminine, this voice was shaped in reverence, not recklessness. You don't speak for attention anymore. You speak because the weight within you can no longer remain unnamed. And that naming isn't a show, it's release. That's why your voice lands differently now. You've said no to words that once came easily. You've starved your speech of flattery. You've fasted from manipulation. And in that discipline, you've developed a mouth that doesn't take, it transfers. When you talk to women now, they don't feel seduced. They feel safe. Not because your voice is sweet, but because it's sourced from a deeper peace. They hear the silence that made you. They feel the gravity that holds you. And even when you speak softly, they know. This man has wrestled in the quiet places, and his sound is not an accident. So they come closer, not to be impressed, but to be settled. Because a man who learned to speak from silence will never use his words to harm. He'll use them to hold. Chosen one, the feminine has heard many voices. She's heard men flatter her beauty, mimic her words, study her movements, and mirror her language. But few voices have understood her. Fewer still have held her truth without trying to reshape it. Yours does. Not because you studied her, but because you studied yourself. And in studying yourself, you found the frequency of authenticity. And that frequency is what she hears when you speak. When you speak to her now, she feels a current of safety moving beneath every sentence. You are no longer trying to say the right thing. You are being the right presence. Your voice is no longer decoration, it is direction. It doesn't guide her into confusion, it guides her into calm. And that calm is what makes her feel understood. Not because you analyze her, but because you no longer ask her to explain herself. You listen without rushing. You respond without interrupting. You reflect without taking. You allow her space to unfold. Not because you're trying to win her, but because you've become the kind of man who honors what is fragile and fierce at once. That kind of man doesn't talk over her emotions. He creates a space where they are finally allowed to speak back. This is the power of your voice now, not dominance, not seduction, devotion. Your high sexual energy used to chase attention. Now it serves your stillness. It roots your words in presence, and that presence becomes recognition in her body. She doesn't feel watched, she feels seen. She doesn't feel studied, she feels safe. Not because you flatter her, but because your voice no longer says, prove yourself. It says, I can hold you, say what you need. And that, chosen one, is what makes her heart lower its shield. Because when you speak to her now, she hears a man who isn't asking for her light, he's bringing his own. And in that light she sees herself clearly. So she gives you what no one could steal, her truth. Not just her story, not just her beauty, but her real, raw, unscripted soul. Because when you speak, she hears the sound of someone who will not misuse what is sacred, and her soul whispers back, I trust him. Chosen one, you used to speak to impress, to fill silence, to gain attention, to prove your worth. But that man no longer exists. What has emerged in his place is a man whose voice has become a mirror. And not just any mirror, a sacred one. One that reflects the feminine not as she appears to the world, but as she is beneath it all. When you speak to her now, she doesn't just hear you, she sees herself, and not in fragments, but in clarity. And that clarity doesn't come from you telling her who she is. It comes from you becoming so aligned with who you are that your voice reflects her like still water. You speak with no agenda. You do not seek to define her. You do not try to fix her. You no longer speak as a man reaching for her affection, but as one who already carries his own fullness. And because of that, your words no longer land on her skin. They land in her spirit. She listens to you speak, and something within her whispers, he sees me. Not because you've studied her, but because you've mastered yourself. Your high sexual energy doesn't reach out anymore. It radiates inward. It holds space within you, like a silent flame that lights the space around you without setting it on fire. That flame has turned your voice into a sanctuary. When you speak now, your words don't distract. They reflect. They don't chase. They invite. And the feminine, who has been spoken to by so many voices that wanted something from her, recognizes yours as the first one that simply says, you're safe to be whole here. She is drawn not to what you say, but to what your words awaken in her. That awakening is subtle. It starts in the heart. It travels through her breath. It settles in her spine. It brings her awareness back to her own divinity. She doesn't know how to name it, but she knows that when you speak, she feels more real, more grounded, more herself. Not because you've told her who to be, but because your presence gives her permission to remember who she already is. Your voice doesn't overpower. It doesn't seduce. It reverberates, with truth, with integrity, with calm. And in that reverberation, she recognizes something sacred. This man isn't trying to be her mirror. He is one. And not because he reflects her opinions or echoes her ideas, but because his energy is clear enough to reveal her truth without distortion. She speaks more around you, not because you talk less, but because your words don't compete. They don't interrupt. They don't demand space. They create space. And in that space, she sees her reflection in the way you respond to her, in the way you don't flinch at her strength, in the way you don't shrink from her softness, in the way you don't dissect her feelings but hold them like sacred glass, knowing they don't need to be fixed, only felt. And this is why your voice is different now, because it doesn't say, "Look at me," it says, "I see you." And in that seeing, she sees herself. Not through your desire, but through your devotion to your own truth. And that is the kind of mirror she never wants to turn away from. Chosen one, there's a peace that now flows through your voice, a quiet, steady current that women can feel even before they process what you're saying. It's not in the way you speak louder or smarter than others. It's in the way your words come from stillness, not reaction. You have become a man who speaks from overflow, not hunger. And that difference is why your words no longer stir anxiety. They release it. They don't escalate. They de-escalate. They don't press. They soothe. And in this fast, loud, sharp-tongued world, that calm is not just rare, it's irresistible. Women who've had to build fortresses to protect their peace are now finding themselves lowering their guard in your presence, not because you asked them to, but because your voice feels like the place their nervous system can finally rest. You don't demand openness, you don't demand trust, you carry it, and that trust is communicated in your tone, in your rhythm, in your restraint. Your high sexual energy is no longer felt as pressure, it's felt as protection. It wraps around your voice like velvet and steel, soft but unshakable. You don't speak to push your way into someone's life. You speak like a man who's already built a life worth inviting someone into. That invitation isn't spoken through flattery, it's spoken through clarity. And clarity is the greatest relief to a heart that has lived through confusion disguised as connection. When you talk to her now, she doesn't feel that buzz of guarded tension. She feels a slowing, a grounding. Her heart rate settles, her breath deepens. She doesn't have to guess at your intentions because your words don't carry hidden hooks. They carry truth without tension. And that truth is what makes her soften, not just toward you, but toward herself. She feels understood not because you speak her language, but because your energy doesn't distort the message. You don't twist her words. You don't weaponize her openness. You don't rush her into vulnerability. Instead, you unlock it gently, not by asking, but by being the kind of presence that doesn't need to be feared. Your voice has become the rhythm she didn't know she missed. The sound that reminds her that it's safe to not be in control, that it's safe to be quiet, that it's safe to laugh without overthinking, that it's safe to listen, not because she has to, but because you've given her the peace she didn't know she was starving for. And this is what changes everything. She may not remember every word you say, but she'll remember how her body felt when you said it. She'll remember that she didn't have to run, that she didn't have to freeze, that she didn't have to perform. Because when you spoke, she returned to calm. And that return was not something you gave her. It was something your voice unlocked inside her. Chosen one, your words no longer ask for permission. They don't tiptoe into conversations. They don't dance around the edges of acceptance. They arrive like someone who already belongs, not arrogantly, not with entitlement, but with a deep, holy knowing that your presence is not conditional. And that knowing is what shapes the way you speak now. Every sentence you release is rooted in self-certainty. Every pause is framed by the awareness that you don't need to rush to be worthy. You speak not to get in, but because you already are within. There was a time when you talked to be chosen. You tried to say the right thing, to please, to gain favor. You modulated your voice to echo what you thought others wanted. But that voice is gone now, burned away in the refining fire of isolation, rejection, and sacred transformation. You stopped chasing belonging outside yourself, and in doing so you found it within. And because of that, your voice no longer seeks a place, it creates one. When women hear you speak now, they feel the absence of insecurity. They don't feel you adjusting yourself to match their preferences. They don't feel you reaching or rehearsing. They feel you resting. And that rest tells them something no compliment ever could. This man is already home in himself. That kind of confidence doesn't puff its chest or raise its tone. It breathes deeply. It settles into the moment like it was always meant to be there. Your high sexual energy no longer hides behind charisma. It doesn't need to. It's not a mask, it's a core. It pulses beneath your speech like a silent engine, unforced and unashamed. That energy isn't leaking through manipulation. It's held with discipline. And that discipline gives your voice a sacred authority. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that anchors. It speaks not from desire, but from presence. It says, I'm not here to be liked. I'm here because I am. And women feel that, deeply. Some may not understand it, but their body responds. Their breath shifts, their thoughts slow, their resistance eases. Not because you seduced them, but because your voice introduced them to a frequency they forgot existed. A voice that doesn't speak from lack, but from wholeness. And in that wholeness, something ancient stirs. Something they didn't know they were waiting to feel. The presence of a man who is no longer asking for space in their world, because he carries a world of his own within him. You've stopped trying to say what will get you accepted. Now you speak what aligns with your soul. And that truth is magnetic, not because it is loud, but because it is undeniable. When you open your mouth, you don't fill the room, you bring it into alignment. You no longer perform, you establish atmosphere. And the feminine, who has long been asked to shrink, to mold, to adapt, senses in you a man who requires no reshaping, a man who speaks because he knows who he is, a man who doesn't bend to be welcomed because he is the welcome. And that kind of voice doesn't chase admiration. It creates trust. So when you speak now, it's not about how much you say, it's about how fully you say it. You speak from a throne, not a stage. And in that royal calm, she hears the truth. This man isn't waiting to belong. He already does. And maybe for the first time in a long time, so does she. Chosen one, this is where it all converges. All the years of silence, all the fire that forged your restraint, all the moments when your words failed, when your voice was ignored, when your presence felt invisible. It all led to this. Because now, when you speak, you are no longer simply being heard. You are being received. Fully. Deeply. Intimately. Women are not just listening to what you say. They are absorbing the vibration of who you are through every word you speak. This shift is not about eloquence. It's not about having the right vocabulary. It's not about tone or timing or technique. It's about transmission. Your words now carry more than meaning. They carry frequency. The frequency of a man who has been stripped of performance, who has been emptied of false masculinity, who has been broken, refined, and rebuilt by the divine until nothing remained but truth. And when truth speaks, it doesn't seek applause. It creates resonance. She hears you now not because your voice is loud, but because your spirit is present. She doesn't tune into your charm. She leans into your stillness. That stillness isn't lazy. It isn't passive. It is the evidence of a man who has nothing to prove and everything to offer. Your high sexual energy isn't sharp. It's held. And when it speaks through your words, it doesn't create heat. It creates depth. It makes her listen, not with her ears, but with her entire nervous system. Her body settles, her mind softens, her soul opens. You are not using your mouth to take anything. You are giving space. You are speaking like a man who knows the weight of his words and honors that weight like sacred fire. And that's what she's responding to. Not your lines, not your rhythm, your integrity, the way your words match your walk, the way your voice has stopped begging and started blessing. You're not trying to win anymore. You've become the win, not by strategy, but by becoming a voice that carries light without burning, weight without burden, truth without judgment. A voice that says, I don't need anything from you to speak to you with reverence. And that reverence what makes her feel received, not entertained, not studied, received. Your words now move like water over stone. They don't break her down, they carve her open, gently, honestly, without asking for anything back. And in that gentle carving, she finds something holy, a place inside herself that only a true man could awaken. Not because you tried, but because you became still enough to carry her truth inside your voice without dropping it. And so now when you speak, you are not just heard, you are not just noticed, you are felt, you are welcomed, you are trusted. Because your mouth no longer echoes noise, it channels presence. And that presence, it's not asking for her heart. It's holding space for her to give it, fully, freely, fiercely, not because she had to, but because your voice became the one place where she could finally hear her own.